I believe in the sovereignty of the people. And in fact, I believe in the sovereignty of the Scottish people. And the Scottish people spoke in 2014 and they voted to be part of the United Kingdom. And then the Scottish people, as the British people, took part in a referendum, the United Kingdom referendum in 2016. And the British people spoke. And I believe in their sovereign rights to be respected. So I'll rise to his challenge. The benefits the Scottish people are getting from leaving the European Union is the Scottish people are taking control of their own laws and their own money and control of their own... something dear to his heart, I imagine, the Scottish Parliament is going to have more power as a result of us leaving the European Union, and he seems to be very quiet about that. In the emergency debate on Tuesday, the 11th of December, Mr. Speaker, I emphasised the democratic legitimacy of the referendum vote. The Commons voted to give the decision to remain or leave to the voters by 544 votes to 53, and then we accepted that decision and invoked Article 50 by 494 votes to 122. Now, nobody could possibly question the courteous determination and sincerity of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who has strived so hard to secure an agreement from our EU partners acceptable to this House. But it now looks most unlikely that this draft agreement will be approved because this would leave the UK in a less certain and more invidious position than we are prepared to accept. Nevertheless, the EU Withdrawal Act, which sets the exit date as the 29th of March 2019, did pass this House. Now, this Act could have included an amendment that the Act should not come into force without an Article 50 withdrawal agreement. But we approved that Act, which provides for leaving the EU without a withdrawal agreement. And I think even my right honourable friend from Mid-Sussex voted for that Act. Parliament has now spoken. The Act makes provision for the so-called meaningful vote, but not for any kind of vote in this House to prevent Brexit without a withdrawal agreement. Democracy has been served. For some MPs now to complain that they did not intend to vote for what the Act provides for is rather lame. They may have held a different hope or expectation, but the government gave no grounds for that. The government always said and still says that no deal is better than a bad deal. Parliament has approved the law and set the date. There is no democratic case for changing it, and nor could it be in the national interest. The Right Honourable Lady for Hackney North and Stoke Newington reminded us of some of the less pleasant elements in the spectrum of British politics. But elsewhere in the EU, extremism is becoming far more entrenched than here. AfD in Germany, the Gilets jaunes on the streets of Paris, Lega Nord in Italy, which has actually taken power. Popular revolt against the immovability of the established EU consensus in the rest of the EU cannot be blamed on Brexit. On the contrary, in our broad, largely two-party democracy, we have proved to be the most durable and resistant to extremism because we absorb and reflect the effects of political and economic shocks. UKIP died in the 2017 general election because both the main parties pledged to implement the referendum decision without qualification. But what are some in this House trying to achieve now? What would be the consequences for the stability and security of our democracy if the government let the politicians turn on the majority of their own voters? And they would say, the politicians are taking back control, not for Parliament, but to keep the EU in control. Voters did not vote to accept whatever deal the EU is prepared to offer. They voted to leave, whether or not the EU gives us permission. Ruling out leaving without the withdrawal agreement is not a democratic option. They did not vote to remain as the only alternative to a bad deal. They did not vote for the EU to hold the UK hostage, nor did they vote for a second referendum. Of course, that's what the EU really wants, which is why they won't give the EU a good deal. And it is shameful that so many leading political figures from our country have been shipping themselves over to Brussels to tell them not to make concessions in the negotiations with their own government in order to try and get a second referendum. The EU is a profoundly undemocratic and unaccountable institution whose biggest project, the euro, has inflicted far worse disaster on businesses, individuals and families in many countries than even the direst Treasury forecast for the UK. And the economic and political storm clouds are still just gathering over the EU. It is the EU which is on the cliff edge of disaster, not the UK. In the years to come, in the words of Mervyn King, the former Governor of the Bank of England, if you give people a chart of British GDP and ask them to point where we left the EU, they won't be able to see it. Our domestic policies, as well as our trade with the rest of the world, have already become far more important than our present trading relationship with the EU. We will have the freedom to develop this more quickly. Our EU membership does not just cost the net contribution of £10 billion per year and rising, which does no more than avoid some £5.3 billion of tariffs, but it has locked the UK into an EU trading advantage, leaving the UK with an EU trade deficit of £90 billion per year. Why are we trying to preserve such a disadvantageous trading relationship? Even if we leave without a withdrawal agreement, there will be immediate benefits. WTO is a safer haven than the backstop. Far from crashing out, we will be cashing in. We will keep £39 billion, which immediately improves our balance of payments and can be invested in public services or distributed in tax cuts or to speed up economic adaptation. This would boost GDP by 2% over the next few years. We will end uncertainty. The draft agreement would perpetuate it. Business needs clarity about trading conditions from the EU from day one. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon himself, campaigned for Remain side by side with George Osborne, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer. JP Morgan now says that extending Article 50 is, quotes, the worst case scenario, unquotes, because, and I quote, they don't see what it provides us in reaching a clear final outcome that provides certainty for businesses. And they add, quite rightly, paralysis is not good for the economy. And yet that's what the Article 50 extenders are arguing for. We will not be caught in any backstop if we leave without a withdrawal agreement, nor will there be a hard border in Ireland. Even Leo Varadkar has said, quote, under no circumstances will there be a border, full stop, unquote. And the EU and the UK government have both said the same. And all the more ludicrous scare stories are being disproved. There will be no queues at Dover or Calais. The President of the Port of Boulogne-Calais could not have been more emphatic. He said, they laugh because they just don't want to hear the truth. This is what he said. This is what he said. We have been preparing for no deal for a year. We will be ready. We will not check trucks more than we are doing today. We will not stop and ask more than we are doing today. And he added that the new special area for SPS checks is somewhere else. It will not influence the traffic in Dover. The government and the pharma companies are saying they can guarantee supplies of medicines. The EU Commission has proposed visa-free travel for UK citizens in the EU for up to 6 months of the year. The EU statement of 19th of December already proposes its own period of transition of up to 9 months, including no disruption of central bank clearing, a new air services agreement, access to the EU for road haulage operators, and special regulations on customs declarations. Leaving it on WTO terms is far preferable to the protracted uncertainty of either extending Article 50 or of this unacceptable withdrawal agreement. And, Mr. Speaker, the leadership of this country, and that includes the government and the opposition, should stop reinforcing weakness and start talking up our strengths and building up our confidence. History has proved, Mr. Speaker, our country can always rise to the challenge, and our people will never forgive the politicians who allow the EU to inflict defeat, and it saddens me greatly that even some in my own party are promoting such a defeat.